Hello friends, welcome to the Point. In today's session, let's discuss about development policies and experience from 1947 to 1990. And in that, we are particularly dealing with Indian economy from 1950 to 1990. So we all know that on 15th August 1947, India got independence, and finally we were the masters of our own destiny. After some 100 years of British rule, the job of the nation building, it was in our own hands, and the leaders of independent India, they had to decide among other things, that is the type of economic system that is suitable for our nation and a system which will promote the welfare of the society. There are different types of economic system. They are capitalist society, socialist society and mixed economies. In a capitalist society, the goods produced, they are distributed among people not on the basis of what people need, but it depends on the basis of purchasing power, the ability to buy goods and services. And that is, one has to have money in the pocket to buy anything. Low cost housing for the poor is much needed, but will not count as a demand in the market sense, because the poor do not have the purchasing power to back the demand. And as a result of this, commodity will not be produced and supplied as per market forces. And such a society did not appeal to our first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, and it meant that the great majority of people of the country would be left behind without the chance to improve their quality of life. Next is socialist society. In this socialist society, it answers three questions in a totally different manner. In socialist society, the government decides what goods ought to be produced in accordance with needs of society, and it is assumed that government knows what is good for the people of the country, and so the desires of individual consumers are not given much importance, and the government decides how goods are to be produced and how they should be marketed and so on. Principally, the distribution under socialism is supposed to be based on what people need and not on what they can afford to purchase. Mixed economies. So most of the economies, they are mixed economies. Mixed economies means the government and the market together answer three questions of what to produce, how to produce and how to distribute what is produced. And in a mixed economy, the market will provide whatever goods and services it can produce well, and the government will provide essential goods and services which the market fails to do. Nehru and many other leaders and thinkers of the newly independent India, they sought an alternative to the extreme versions of capitalism and socialism, and basically sympathizing with socialist outlook, they found the answer in economic system, and it combined the best features of socialism without its drawbacks. And in this way, India would be a socialist society with a strong public sector, but also with private property and democracy. And the government would plan for the economy with the private sector being encouraged to be part of plan effort. The industrial policy revolution of 1948 and the directive principles of Indian Constitution, it reflected this outlook. And in the year 1950, the Planning Commission, it was set up with the Prime Minister as its chairperson, and the era of 5 years plan began. The goals of 5 years plan. A plan should have some clear specified goals, and the goals of a 5-year plan are growth, modernization, self-reliance and equity. This does not mean that all the plans have given equal importance to all these goals, and due to some limited resources, a choice has to be made in each plan about which goal is to be given a primary importance. So now let us learn in detail about the goals of planning. Growth. It refers to increase in country's capacity to produce the output of goods and services within the country. So growth implies either a larger stock of productive capital or a larger size of supporting services like transport and banking, or an increase in efficiency of productive capital and services. A good indicator of economic growth in the language of economics is a steady increase of GDP, that is the gross domestic product. The GDP is the market value of all goods and services produced in the country during a year. The GDP of a country is derived from different sectors of economy like agricultural sector, industrial sector and service sector. Modernization. To increase the production of goods and services, the producers have to adopt new technology. For example, let's say a farmer can increase the output of the farm by using new seed varieties instead of using the old ones. And similarly, a factory can increase output by using a new type of machine. Adoption of new technology is called modernization. Modernization does not refer only to the use of new technology, but also to changes in social outlook, like recognition that women should have the same rights as men, and so on. In a traditional society, women are supposed to remain at home and only men go to work. And in a modern society, it makes use of the talents of women in the workplace like banks, factories, schools and so on. And such a society in most occasions is also prosperous. Self-reliance. A nation, it can promote economic growth and modernization by using its own resources or by using resources imported from other nations also. The first 7 5-year plans, it gives importance to self-reliance, which means avoiding imports of those goods which could be produced in India itself. And this policy, it was considered a necessity in order to reduce our dependence on foreign countries, especially for food. And from this it is understandable that the person who were recently freed from foreign domination should give importance to self-reliance. And further, there was a fear that the dependence on imported food supplies, foreign technology and foreign capital, it may make India's sovereignty vulnerable to foreign interference in our policies. Equity. Now growth, modernization and self-reliance by themselves, they may not improve the kind of life which people are living. A country can have high growth, the most modern technology developed in the country itself, and also most of its people are living in poverty. It is important to ensure that the benefits of economic prosperity reach the poor sections instead of being enjoyed only by the rich. So in addition to the growth, modernization and self-reliance, equity is also important. Every Indian should be able to meet his or her basic needs like food, a decent house, education and healthcare. And inequality in the distribution of wealth should be reduced. So now let's discuss how the first 7 5-year plan that covers the period from 1950 to 1990 attempted to attain these 4 goals. And also let's see the extent to which they succeeded in doing so. And let's see about the plans that covers about agriculture, industry and trade. Agriculture. In the previous sessions, we have learned that during the colonial rule, there was neither growth nor equity in the agricultural sector. The policy makers of independent India, they had to address these issues, which they did through land reforms, and also by promoting the use of high yielding variety seeds. Land reforms. At the time of independence, the land tenure system, it was characterized by intermediaries, variously called zamindars, zagirdars, and so on. And these people merely collected rent from actual tillers of the soil without contributing towards improvement on the farm. The low productivity of agricultural sector, it forced India to import food from United States of America, and equity in agriculture called for land reforms, which primarily referred to change in ownership of land holdings. Land ceiling, it was another policy to promote equity in agricultural sector. Land ceiling means fixing the maximum size of land which could be owned by an individual. And the purpose of land ceiling was to reduce the concentration of land ownership in a few hands. The abolition of intermediaries, it meant some 200 lakh tenants, they came into direct contact with the government, and they were freed from being exploited by jamindars. And the ownership conferred on the tenants, it gave them the incentives to increase output, and this contributed to growth in agriculture. But still, the goal of equity was not fully served by abolition of intermediaries. In some areas, the former zamindars continued to own large areas of land by making use of some loopholes in the legislation. The land ceiling legislation, it also faced some hurdles. The big landlords, they challenged the legislation in the courts, delaying its implementation. And they used this delay to register their lands in the name of close relatives, and therefore they escaped from legislation. Land reforms were successful in Kerala and West Bengal because these states had governments committed to the policy of land to the tiller, and unfortunately other states, they did not have the same level of commitment. The Green Revolution. So at independence, about 75% of the country's population were dependent on agriculture itself. Productivity in agricultural sector, it was very low because of the use of old technology and the absence of required infrastructure. India's agriculture, it depends on the monsoon, and if the monsoon fell short, the farmers were in trouble. The stagnation in agriculture during the colonial rule, it was permanently broken by Green Revolution. This refers to large increase in production of food grains that resulted from the use of high yielding variety seeds, especially for wheat and rice. And the use of these seeds, it required the use of fertilizers and pesticides. The farmers who could benefit from high yielding variety seeds, they required reliable irrigation facilities as well as the financial resources to purchase fertilizers and pesticides. Growth in agricultural output is important, but it is not enough. If a large proportion of this increase is consumed by the farmers themselves instead of being sold in the market, the higher output will not make much difference to the economy. The portion of agricultural produce which is sold in the market by the farmers is called marketed surplus. A good proportion of rice and wheat produced during Green Revolution, it was sold by the farmers in the market, and as a result of this, the price of the food grains, it declined to the other items of consumption. Industry and trade. Economists have found that poor nation, they can progress only if they have good industrial sector, and industry provides employment which is more stable than the employment in agriculture, and it promotes modernization and overall prosperity. Public and private sectors in Indian industrial development. So at the time of independence, Indian industrialists, did not have the capital to undertake investment in industrial ventures required for the development of our economy. The decision to develop the Indian economy on socialist lines, it led to the policy of the state controlling the commanding heights of the economy, as the second 5-year plan put it, and this meant that the state would have complete control of those industries. The policies of private sector have to be complementary to those of public sector, with the public sector leading the way. Industrial Policy Resolution 1956. So, in accordance with the goal of the state controlling the commanding heights of the economy, the Industrial Policy Resolution of 1956 was adopted, and this resolution, it formed the basis of second 5-year plan, the plan which tried to build the basis for socialist pattern of the society. And this resolution, it classified industries into 3 categories. The first category, it comprised industries which should be exclusively owned by state, and the second category consisted of industries in which the private sector could complement the efforts of state sector, and the third category consisted of remaining industries which were to be in the private sector, and this policy was used for promoting industry in the backward regions. Small scale industry. So in the year 1955, the Village and Small Scale Industry Committee, which is also called as Carvey Committee, it noted the possibility of using small scale industries for promoting rural development, and a small scale industry is defined with reference to the maximum investment allowed on the assets of a unit, and this limit, it has changed over a period of time. In 1950, a small scale industrial unit was one which invested a maximum of rupees 5 lakh. At present, the maximum investment allowed is 1 crore, and it is believed that small scale industries are more labor intensive, that is, they use more labor than large scale industries. But these industries, they cannot compete with big industrial firms. It is obvious that the development of small scale industry requires them to be shielded from the large firms, and for this purpose the production of number of products, it was reserved for small scale industry, and there were also given concessions such as lower excise duty and bank loans at lesser rate of interest. Trade policy, import substitution. The industrial policy that we adopted, it was closely related to trade policy. In the first 7 plans, trade was characterized by what is commonly called an inward looking trade strategy, and technically this strategy is called import substitution. This policy, it aimed at replacing or substituting imports with domestic production. For example, instead of importing vehicle which is made in a foreign countries, industries would be encouraged to produce those vehicles in India itself. And in this policy, the government protected the domestic industries from foreign competition. And protection from imports, it took 2 forms: tariffs and quotas. Tariffs are a tax on imported goods, and they make imported goods more expensive and discourage their use. And quotas. They specify the quantity of goods which can be imported. The effect of tariffs and quotas is that they restrict imports, and therefore they protect the domestic firms from foreign competition. And the policy of protection, it is based on a notion that industries of developing countries are not in a position to compete against the goods produced by more developed economies, and it is assumed that if the domestic industries are protected, they will learn to compete in the course of time. And our planners, they also feared the possibility of foreign exchange being spent on import of luxury goods if no restrictions were placed on imports. So in conclusion, we can say that the progress of Indian economy during the first 7 plans was impressive, and our industries, it became far more diversified when compared to the situation at independence, and India became a self-sufficient in food production thanks to a green revolution for it, and land reforms, it resulted in the abolition of hated zamindari system. And many economists, they become dissatisfied with the performance of many public sector enterprises. Excessive government regulation, it prevented growth of entrepreneurship. In the name of self-reliance, our producers were protected against foreign competition, and this did not give them the incentive to improve the quality of goods that they produced. Our policies were inward oriented, and so we failed to develop a strong export sector. So in the next session, let's discuss about economic reforms. Thank you.